up, you know. That is one way to deal with it. It's hard, you know, technological projection is hard to deal with. Steve?
Yeah, and let's face it, I think some of the scope for traditional Golden Age science fiction has been lessened now that the space probes have ruined the solar system. And you can't have Martian princesses anymore unless you're dealing with fantasy.
But you can have
you can't have jungles you can't have steaming jungles on Venus. You can, however, when you're dealing with alternate history, yeah, it's quite clear that you're talking about something outside the actual world, but non-supernatural. Let me put in a caveat there. Alternate history doesn't have to be non-supernatural. There have been some excellent works of alternate history in which the history has become alternate as a result of supernatural phenomena. The Dragon Waiting by John M. Ford, one of the most brilliant fantasy novels, and I would classify it as fantasy, that I've ever read. And his change point is that Justinian succeeded in jump-starting the Eastern Roman Empire, and it's still a superpower in the 1400s. And the reason Justinian was able to do so is because in this alternate world, vampirism works, and Justinian became a vampire and therefore lived long enough to achieve his ends.
Yes, sir.
Also, mainstream physics has been talking about multiple universes branching off of each other and stuff for a long time too. So it almost seems like that would mean that a lot of these alternate histories would have to exist in some universe.
Yeah, I mean, if you believe in the infinite quantum universes, there's probably some universe. My personal theory is that deja vu is when you come to such an important node in your existence that you inadvertently sense the presence of yourself in the other existence. When I moved to Texas in 1985, the next year I got my first newspaper job, and I went to this town and I took over a decrepit newspaper. Decrepit. But I looked at the office and I had an incredible sense of deja vu. I said, I have never been here before in my life. Why am I having this sense of deja vu? Well, I did such a good job at that paper. A year later, they promoted me an editor in a bigger town. And that's where I met my wife and married my wife. That's the most important thing that happened in my existence. And now I see in retrospect, it was almost as if, you know, this is so important in my life. This was such an important node. I felt the pressure. It was creepy. It was creepy. But I said, I'll find out what this means later. As it turned out, it was extraordinarily important in my life. I mean, it's the most, in my case, finding the right woman, as you can tell, it was a difficult task to begin with. It was the most important thing in my existence.
Yeah, by the way, this is another thing about alternate history. There is a tendency among a lot of alternate history to assume that a lot of things don't change. People, for example. Harry Turtledove and Richard Dreyfuss wrote something called The Two Georges, in which well, it wasn't the British win the Revolutionary War. There wasn't a Revolutionary War. The whole thing was patched up, and North America in the 20th century is still part of the British Empire. But you got people running around like Martin Luther King and Richard Nixon and an unassassinated John F. Kennedy and so forth. I don't believe it. In a world that different, I don't think they would have been born. Even better example, this wasn't a novel, it was a gaming product. But this was another Brits win the Revolutionary War scenario, and it had a second American rebellion starting in the late 1850s, led by none other than Abraham Lincoln and Robert E. Lee. Now, it's a cute idea, but let's think about this. Lee was born in 1807 to a father who, in this alternate history, would have been hanged for a rebel general in 1783. Lincoln was born in 1809 in Kentucky to parents who were part of the Western population movement that wasn't allowed to happen in this alternate history. The point I'm getting at is, I mean, if you wanted to have Andrew Jackson in a Brits win alternate history, that's fine. He was already born at the time. But after that, all bets are off.
You're just a POD pooper. What?
From the point of view of pure history, I agree with you. After the change, a lot of people are going to different. And if the world does go differently, most people we know and love aren't going to be there later on. But from the writer's point of view, there's a lot to be said for using people everyone already knows about, like Robert E. Lee. Even if from the peer point of view, it's really bad history. So I think Turtle Dove was generally pointing to things like different, rather than taking the purist view that none of these people are actually going to exist.
Yes, sir.
I've sort of noticed with alternate history, there's sort of a period where you can actually write an alternate history, and or where most alternate history gets written. I won't say nobody's written something about something, because I'm sure somebody's written about everything. But you get a lot of stuff about World War II. You get relatively less stuff about like U.S. wins Vietnam. I've seen nothing about like 9/11 took out all of Congress and the president. What changes after that? So
I want to do an alternate history where a German immigrant to the American Midwest at the start in the early part of the 20th century completely flops in his attempts at writing and artwork and goes into food service. And after starting in a lowly fry cook, he rises to be the leader of a major American hamburger chain. I want to call it the Man in the White Castle.
That's
Yes, if puns were a crime, I'd be on death row. I think you gave me an excuse. I'm sorry, I probably cut you off, but I haven't said that one for years. Yeah, I'll leave now. Goodbye.
Yeah, the question was, is there a reason that you can think of that people don't write about things that are too recent? Like, it was not too much about the Soviet Union winning the Cold War.
Yeah.
Considering how important that would have
well, it's
been.
painful. It took a while for people to start writing about alternate histories involving the Holocaust.
Yeah.
You know, I went to college in New York City. I knew guys who were the offspring of 2 Holocaust survivors. That's painful stuff. There needs to be some distance. 9/11, again, is, you know, more people died in 9/11 than died in Pearl Harbor. That's painful. It'll come. It'll come. Kennedy assassination took a while too. But it eventually happened. But the first story that came out about the Kennedy assassination was a cloning thing called Joshua, Son of Nun. It wasn't written until the 70s. It took at least 15 years. There just is a period when it resonates too closely and it gets misinterpreted, in my opinion. I don't know what you all think.
There's also very little history. I mean, 9/11 was only 12 years ago, and World War II was 50 years ago, and we know a lot of what happened.
Right.
I also know a lot of things that weren't known at the time. For instance, the Germans didn't know the British were reading their communications, but we know now that happened. For 9/11, there's only a very short period of what happened afterwards.
Right.
What changed because of it.
In short, there's less scope for deviation the closer you get to the present day, and more within reason the further back you go.
It's about time that we need to wrap up.
It is.
So unless anybody got a quick question we can answer from the audience? Yes, sir.
any recommended markets for sending stuff?
Well, there is a magazine called Alt History, online easy called. Actually, I think they have a print edition called Alternate History.
Yeah, magazine. If you're talking novel length stuff.
Short story, novel, anything.
Bain, which is my publisher,